Welcome to the Denison Forum podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Turman, the Executive Director at Denison Forum. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Today, we're going to have an interesting conversation about church safety and security. I'm joined today by two of my good friends, my fellow pastor, John Mark Caton, who serves at Cottonwood Creek Church in the Dallas area. John Mark, say hello.
Hello.
We're glad to have you. John Mark has been there 28 years, correct?
Yeah, almost 27 and a half.
27 and a half. We kind of round up.
Yeah,
all pastors like to round up. We never round down. So almost 28 years. Married to Gina for how long?
That is 32 years. I do know that one.
All right. Tell us about your kids.
You know, we've got 4 kids. 3 of them have now graduated from college and gotten married. Married 3 kids off in the last 15 months, and that was an expensive endeavor, but a good journey. They all live in the area, which is a great thing. Then the one we do have quasi at home is our sophomore in college, our youngest Jarrett. So 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. 3 of them now married, have jobs, paying their own way, a good thing.
Don't you love that balloon payment called a wedding at the end of college?
There is one.
Yeah,
there is one.
That's a fun thing. We also have with us my good friend, longtime elder at the church that I served in the Dallas area, Paul Cobb. Paul is originally from Round Rock and has a background in a number of different careers. Haven't found one that you like to stick with yet, have you, Paul?
Well, no. Variety is the spice of life.
But Paul works in corporate America, has served several banks, major banking areas, ran data centers, and does project management all over the state of Texas and the region, in fact, working in a number of different areas. But today, he's going to help us, John Mark's going to help us with the conversation about church security and about church safety. And we know that this is happening all around the world, all around the country. But I want to just start off by asking both of you, do you think church is a safe place?
I think it should be, and it's as safe as we make it. I'm just am repeatedly surprised that church is the one place that you turn your normal brain off when it comes to safety and security issues. I mean, the things that you would go through, your checklist in your brain before you would drop your child off at a movie theater or to walk through in a mall, somehow you don't apply that when you go to church. I mean, the standard sequence is you get up and you get the kids ready, and then you have a fight with one of the kids on the way, and then you have the argument with the wife in the truck on the way to church, and then you get there desperately looking for peace, and you put your blinders on and you walk through the doors and you hope for the best. And hopefully there's an environment where you can have an experience with the living God of the universe. But safety, security, just normal prudence just never enters into your line of thinking when you go to church.
Yeah.
You know, and as I think about now being the pastor for 27 and a half years, go back to the early days back in Fairview, which is now Cottonwood Creek, that was the furthest thing from my mind, you know, that you just thought, hey, let's come to worship God. This should be a safe place. It should be a place that even those who are sinful or corrupt would never consider bringing harm to a place. And so we did think about simple things, small things like how can we make the playground more safe? How can we make the swing set safe? How can we do those things? But over the years, you know, just being honest and evaluating churches and what can happen in a church at multiple different levels, just accidents, medical emergencies, or security issues. I've really have had to come a long way in this area, Paul and Mark, just to come to a place that we are today.
Paul, talk a little bit about that from standpoint. We are talking about something now that's more than simply, you know, playground landing pads and people being courteous in the parking lot, not getting too fast in there, turning on the alarm system when everybody's leaving the building at night. What are we really talking about when we try to put a frame around what we mean by church security and safety?
Well, I mean, understand foundationally, broad strokes, what is the church, right? It is a place for corporate worship. It is a place for the equipping of the saints to go out and carry out the Great Commission, but it's also a hospital for battered souls. And as such, you know, the miracle is really the number of incidents that don't happen, given that hurting people hurt people, right? And people come to churches. Also, the taboo has been lifted, right? whether you're talking about the United States as a nation now being a target for terrorism, or you're talking about criminals who would come and perpetrate crimes at a church that used to be just kind of taboo, right? It would never cross anyone's mode of thinking, but now they've discovered that it's a soft target, and we get a lot of domestic violence spillover, where you've got personal conflicts that, hey, somebody goes home and they can lock the doors and they can turn on their home alarm, and then they go to the office and they're behind, access controlled security monitoring doors at the office. But church is like the one place where, if you're a church person, people know where you're going to be, when you're going to be there, and that it's open to everybody. And so, how do you gear that protection environment to an environment by design that has to be open and welcoming to not just everybody, but especially those that are hurting and are needing help is a particular challenge that we're facing today in very significant ways.
Yeah. John Mark, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, what are just some examples of the kind of stuff that's happened at your church that in some way relates to security and safety?
Yeah, well, obviously, not just the accidental problems. We've, medical emergencies, but we've now had spouses that have come, the ex that has come looking for, their mate or the child or something like that. We've had those kind of incidences. We've had people come into our facility who are broken people, and the reality is they're broken people that have created a high level of concern that either Paul or someone else on our lay team who operates in our security team has had to address and deal with and move beyond. We've had to go to the place of even calling law enforcement on people. And part of what we need is at that point, you need a staff member that says, we need this person to leave the premises. So we've had all of those things and more. And so sadly, we're not immune to it. We're
fights
not immune.
On the volleyball courts.
We've had fights on the volleyball courts where we had to call the police. We've got sand volleyball courts. We've had in the last couple of years, not too long ago. It actually didn't just happen to our church, but people. This would be more of. Basically stealing TVs. We had someone break into a room one day in one of our glass windows, just walked around our building, took all of our big screen TVs off the wall, and then just piled in a car and left.
Must have been Super Bowl weekend.
That's exactly right. Interestingly enough, they hit about 4 or 5 churches in a row and eventually got caught. But if people are willing to do that and come into the church, they're also willing to harm people, and that's what we always want to be careful of, especially in a facility like ours where we're open 7 days a week. Every night you can walk into our facility and there's a crowd of people doing something there. And so to have security available to them and for them is something that's important.
Yeah. So you guys work together on this. Paul, you and I kind of took this journey together going back 10 or 15 years ago. You kind of walked into this as a volunteer just in the context of the church that you and I are a part of. Kind of tell that story a little bit about how you started sensing the need and how, I'd like for both of you to kind of comment about how you see this not simply as a function like having the lights on or make sure that the plumbing works right, but seeing this as a ministry to the congregation. But Paul, kind of tell the story about how this kind of emerged over the last 10, 15 years for you.
Well, it started as a minor incident on a Wednesday night, choir practice late at night. Some locals had cased the parking lot, marked the vehicles in the parking lot that had high value, high portability items, went back to the corner, noticed that no one had noticed, and then just did a smash and grab through multiple vehicles, and then they were gone in 2 minutes. And so we got there, and of course, as things went, they called me at home and said, hey, somebody broke in some cars up here at church. And I'm like going, well, did you call the police? They said, no, we called you.
And there's a whole background to that story, but we don't have time for that.
Did they suspect you?
I'll bring the police with me.
Yeah, were you the first suspect?
Yeah.
I think John Mark is on to something there.
And so it turns out that, we activated a mobile phone that had been stolen. We could hear that they were driving. We heard a radar detector go off in the background. Another, husband was up there saying, hey, the only place that happens is over at Skaggs on Virginia. And so McKinney sent some elements over there. Sure enough, caught the guys behind Albertsons splitting up the loot. So it was basically a non-incident. They were caught, we recovered the property and all that. But it started a conversation at the elder board that we needed to put together a more comprehensive security and safety program before something more substantial happens. And I went out there to do that thinking that surely there's got to be a half dozen of these canned programs for church security. Let's just go out there and survey them, figure out which one meets our budget and needs the best. Present that back to the elder board. Hey, here's 3 options. Here's the one I kind of lean towards, but you pick. And there was nothing. There was nothing. And so it's like going, well, crud, let's go build one. So we researched every incident of violence on a church property in North America. And then that became a turn for the surreal, where, we kind of expected to see the, mom drops Johnny off at Sunday school, the estranged, spouse picks Johnny up. Now we got hysterical mother missing Johnny. But there's some great off-the-shelf technology things that is available for that now. But this whole thing since 99 of the active shooter was really the 3,000-pound elephant in the room that no one had an answer for. And so we studied all of these incidents about what is going on and how did they happen, and what are some common threads, and what can we learn, and how can we prepare, and, is there anything we can do? And we found 2 significant themes through it. One is that, we alluded to it earlier, when people come to church, no one's looking, right? No one's looking for trouble. And so when trouble comes, it seems to not hit anybody's radar when it walks on in. And the other significant theme that we discovered was what we call Granny in the Zoom bag. And you know who your grandmother is. And a Zoom bag is a military flight suit. You've seen them on movies and stuff like that. But if your grandmother walked through the door of your church wearing a military flight suit, those things are so disassociative that your brain just does not process that efficiently and effectively. And the net result is we're doing these after-action interviews where these horrible, tragic things happen. And it's like, did no one see the guy walking across the parking lot with a rifle? It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we had multiple witnesses that said they saw the guy with the rifle for 300 feet. And didn't think there'd be a problem until shots rang out. And then it's like, oh, my goodness, what's going on? And we asked him, well, what were you thinking? Well, we thought, the men's ministry was advertising a dove hunt, or the youth department was running a skit. I go, has the youth department or the men's ministry ever brought rifles into the church building? No. But see, that's where your brain goes.
But just that dissonance.
Because of the dissonance, right? And so we're like, okay, first and foremost, we've got to get some people that are looking for the trouble, and then teach them what to do if they find it. And so that's where it all started. And then your depth and breadth of the program is, what do you need to meet medical emergencies? What do you need to meet? We get a lot of missing persons, and that sounds worse than it really is. But Johnny goes to the bathroom, but Johnny doesn't come back to a Sunday school class. After he goes to the bathroom, now we've got a missing kid. Do you have a process and a procedure for how you look and where you look and who do you engage to help with the search and where's Johnny usually at? And then up to and including this thing called the active shooter. Do you have the tools, the talent, the training, and the tactics to combat that sort of threat? Because it's out there. And if your police departments will be the first one to tell you that whatever was going to happen will have happened by the time they get there. And so whatever you do, just keep that in mind. And so, as long as we're busting bubbles here, let's go ahead and acknowledge that there's no such thing as crime prevention. There's only victim avoidance. If somebody needs to steal something to fund a lifestyle choice, and your garage door in your neighborhood is closed and locked and your neighbor's is open and unattended, where does the criminal go? Goes to the open garage. Now, has a crime been prevented, or did you just avoid being the victim because you were more prudent than your neighbor was, right? And then the second thing is, the police do not exist for your personal protection. The police exist for the protection of the community, protection of the city, the state. And they do that. Crimes happen. They come up, they investigate, they figure out who did it, they arrest them, they prosecute them, they incarcerate them, and thus protect the community. But there's no protection for that original victim, right? And so the police don't exist for your personal protection. The two things that every dead victim of violent crime scream out from beyond the grave are, I wish I'd had more choices than I had at the moment of my demise. And two, the police were not there for their personal protection. So if you understand those foundational things and then go, okay, if those are the realities that are driving the dynamic, what do we need to do in the form of countermeasures to protect our congregation, our staff, our reputation, and witness in the community of our local church?
So, John Mark, explain a little bit how this has played out in your mind and for your congregation in the last number of years. Was there a time 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where you might not have had anybody charged with quote unquote security functions when your congregation gathered? Maybe there was a time when you hired a few off-duty police officers and called it good. How's this evolved for you and for your church?
You know, that's a great question, because if you had gone back 10, 15 years, we wouldn't have had much. We wouldn't have had much at all. We knew that we had police officers on campus. They were members of our church, but we had no organizational structure to it. The good news is back long before I met Paul, what really happened is we had a guy who was a Secret Service agent and an FBI agent just decide, if this is going to be our church, we're going to fix this problem. And I can still to this day remember them setting an appointment with me, meeting me in my office saying, we've got to fix this. And because they knew of the statistics, they knew what was going on. We're a church right there on a major thoroughfare. We could be an easy target. And they were like, Pastor, all it takes is for you to give us the blessing, and then we'll start organizing this ministry for you. And they were not talking about a heavily paid for ministry. They were saying, let us develop the people that are already in our church, who already have a security background, already have an awareness, have an understanding, maybe a military background. We can coordinate with them and just get eyeballs on everybody. And so early on in the philosophy was that we want to be medical, but we also, we want security, legitimate security. And then they really started the idea, I can clearly remember from that point on, it starts with eyes in the parking lot. Talking to your people that have volunteered to be your parking attendants, get eyes on, as you describe, someone that doesn't look right. Then give them the ability to communicate with somebody who's opening the doors. We have people opening the doors at our church. Well, all right, one person passes someone off to another off to someone else. And then we also have on the weekends, and by the way, that's the easiest one to handle. From my perspective, the weekend is the easiest one to handle, because we now develop volunteers and paid security agents or paid police officers on Sunday, on Saturday, because that's where we have so many people that have joined us. But it's easy to then take someone who's already skilled and gifted in a certain area of security or medical, and then get them to serve. Use those talents, skills, and abilities at church. And so it is fully developed over the years. I embraced it when those two guys sat down in my office. Over the years, as security has developed at our church, there have been times that I wanted to put a pause on it or put a slowdown on it, because it still, as a pastor, just doesn't seem right to me that someone would want to walk into a church and hurt innocent people, right? It doesn't. I understand sin. I understand all of those things. So there were times that I would say, let me think on that for a minute. And typically what they would do, Paul, is they say, while you're thinking on it, let us provide you some statistics. And I learned real quickly that I'm going to trust the people that know. And so, interestingly enough, both of those guys, just because of their jobs, have now been transferred to other places, but they were the ones that birthed our security ministry. Now we've got a bunch of other guys that are in our church that want to see this ministry thrive, but they also want to make sure that our people are protected. And that's my great desire. So years ago when the open carry thing, happened, people were like, well, what are we going to do with that? And are we going to allow people to carry in here? Are we going to let lay people carry in our church? Are we going to hire Allen police officers so we're in Allen? Are we going to have other agencies? And the answer became pretty quickly, yes, no, yes. When we started doing that, we want the people who are equipped to do it to do it. And so that's how it developed. Two guys. And so if there's someone who's listening to this podcast out there and you're in a church that does not have a security team, I want to encourage you to be one of those two guys. Walk in and sit down with your pastor and provide the statistics. And I cared enough about my people to say, man, we're going to begin this process. And, over the years, we've had a lot of things that happen. The best part so far is that a lot of times when someone gets concerned in the parking lot and then they see them at the door, the one thing we've trained, now it's all of our deacons, by the way. They're not on our security team, but they're on our greeting team. That our desire is no one walks into our church that someone doesn't look them in the eye, shake their hand, and greet them, especially if there's something suspicious about them. No one just comes and stands over at the corner. That's what we want. And so communication is important. The development
of coordination,
a lot of coordination, a lot of earpieces in,
right.
And so that's how it's developed over the years. And a lot of this is because I've let the people who are smart in this area do their jobs. Now you take it off the weekend. That's when we have lots of things going on there 7 days a week. Well, we don't have all those volunteers on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. That's when we go with Paul and his company and say, listen, it is your job to now make sure we're safe.
Right. So this is obviously an evolving kind of ministry, but I want to come back in a minute to the idea of training and the idea that, you really can't hire enough police officers to do this. And so the opportunity of ministry and the importance of training starts to come in here. But would like both of you to kind of get to this idea of maybe we should have started with this, which is the biblical foundation for this ministry and function within a congregation. Again, we've talked about just the general dissonance of we don't go to church expecting that there's danger there. We're glad for that. And we don't want through this podcast or through anything that a security ministry would do to alarm people. But sometimes when you come to a place, we today is the first day of school in Uvalde, Texas. And that whole community and really our whole state and even a larger circle than that is trying to just work their way through what it means for children in that community to go back into to a school session after what they experienced just a few months ago. Any place that has experienced that kind of violence and that kind of terror would resonate with that. We don't want people to be panicked. We don't want them to be scared to come to worship or to Bible study or to other gatherings at a church or anywhere else, a school or anywhere else like that. But let's talk about the theological, biblical foundation for this. Many people would say, some people would say, I guess, well, we just need to trust God. We just need to trust God to keep us safe. And regardless of what, Paul would oftentimes disturb me when I was pastoring our church, and he would send me a Monday morning email with, hey, these 5 things, these 15 things happened. You probably aren't going to see them in the news. They only ones of certain scale usually end up in the news. But these things happen, and one of the things that Paul and I have laughed about in some ways over the years is a lot of what he has done in his career. He's been paid to make sure bad things didn't happen, and that's the way success got measured. But this list that I would get from him in these Monday morning emails would include bad things that did happen and bad things that almost happened but were prevented by a safety protocol. Let's talk a little bit about what do you think the Bible says in this area about why we should be doing these kinds of things when our congregations gather? You're the theologian, Dr. Caton.
I can go first if you'd like.
Well, I'll let you go first. Here's the way I look at it is, do I want to do it? No. Do I think it's a responsibility for us as a church to have security? I do. I do, sadly, because of the world that we lived in. I wish this wasn't the world we live in, but the realities are we live in a world where bad people do bad things. When we come to church, you talked about it, Paul, as we have a tendency to check our brains at the door. We can't because part of what church is a gathering of vulnerable people. And as a gathering of vulnerable people, one of my jobs as a pastor, whether someone is struggling with a marriage or emotional or some sort of hurt or hang up or heartache or whatever, part of my job is to protect them. All right. Same thing happens with someone's physical safety, in my opinion, is I need to make sure that as best I can, and I'll never be able to do it perfectly, when people come to our worship services and our life groups and our children and our students are coming, that we have a measure and a level of security that will protect them to a point as best as we can. Because some churches are small, and I didn't have this ability that I have today 27 years ago, but I need to be better today than I was 27 years ago. And so we are, as a church, a collection of vulnerable people. And at the same point, I have people in my church who are gifted and skilled at bringing security to others. Why not allow those people who are gifted and talented for security issues to protect my vulnerable people? And that just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Paul?
Yeah, my three go-tos, and Proverbs 22 talks about the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. In John 16:33, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. And then down in Luke 22, Jesus talking to his disciples, preparing them for the day that he is not going to physically be with them anymore. And he's like going, hey, before I sent you without a purse, bag, sandals. Did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. But he said to them, but now's the key phrase here. But now, if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. The disciples then said, see, Lord, here we have 2 swords. And he says, that's enough, right? It was important for him to be armed, if you will, not to overthrow the Roman government, but to protect themselves from wild beasts and highwaymen that were so prevalent back in the day in culture. It's like, hey, we're not going to be pulling coins out of fish anymore. You're going to have to provision yourself moving forward. And so those are kind of the 3 foundational biblical mandates that we use as the foundation of our program. And then, you touched on the philosophical basis and something that at the risk of waxing philosophical for a moment, but if bad stuff only happened to bad people who were doing bad things at the time, would we still call it bad?
We'll have to get our resident theologian in for that conversation.
You laugh because it's funny, but you laugh because it's true. I mean, my favorite example is, the guy who built the bombs that he was going to set off on the New York subway, and he just wasn't very good at it, right? He built these pipe bombs, had a whole bag of them, and one of them goes off in his lap before he gets a chance to set them. Now, he was horribly disfigured, but lived. No one else was injured. Did anyone mourn for him? Or is everyone going, yeah, finally, somebody got what they deserved, got blown up with his own, right? And so for to meet the actual fodder of the definition of bad things have to happen to good people. Right. Bad things have to happen to elderly people. Bad things have to happen to defenseless people. Bad things have to happen to children. And so to the extent that we can protect our own congregations from simply being the fodder for the definition of bad, I'm all in, right? We know that Satan roams to and fro on the earth looking for whom he can destroy and whom he can devour. And what does devoured look like? Well, devoured looks like a kid that takes a gun to an elementary school and shoots people, right? That's what devoured looks like. And so until the second coming, that is out there. And can we truly be shepherds of our flocks and have no semblance or no thought whatsoever given to how we're going to protect that flock until the second coming.
That's right. And, and even within that, we certainly want to avoid that still from our safety security team and our medical team. Still, the vast majority of our calls are one of our elderly people don't feel well. Right. A child fell off the, we have a medical person that is ready to go render aid and determine at that point, do we need to call 911 or do we not need to do that? But, you're exactly right, Paul. I mean, in everything I do, just take non-church world. If I'm going to go to a Dallas Cowboys game, I have an expectation now that there are bad people out there that would love to do something to a collection of people. So what do I want? I want the Dallas Cowboys to at least, and I understand they can't ensure it perfectly, but I want them to take some security measures. If I go to a Mavericks game, if I go to a high school football stadium right now, which I do every weekend, I have an expectation that they're at least taking some precautions to make sure that that I am protected and my family's protected and my kids are protected. Why would we as leaders of churches not also want to provide some semblance of the same protection for our congregants? And that would be my thought.
Right. And unfortunately, the reality of our day, right, is that it's becoming almost standard that you have to be aware of these issues. And Paul, maybe you can give some framework to this, but we've seen it, we kind of grew to have an understanding of, okay, airports, we're going to see security there, especially in the wake of 9/11 that we'll remember this month, that, okay, now we change things because of 9/11. There's a whole different reality to the security of a cockpit door in every airplane these days. And we all know you just plan more time when you go to the airport because it takes longer to get through security. We're adjusting and have adjusted for more than 2 decades to that. Now we have become pretty accustomed to having school resource officers at high schools, but now we're wondering, I'm sure, because of things like Uvalde, now are we going to need to have metal detectors and armed guards at elementary schools? We know at sporting events, but it almost feels like the Buffalo grocery store shooting. It almost feels like you almost can't go anywhere. I was thinking, getting ready for this podcast, I guess the only place I'm not going to see an armed security officer is when the three of us go have a hamburger somewhere, and maybe that will change. I was walking out of the grocery store on Saturday with my wife, and out came a tall Texan, cowboy hat and all, with his sidearm on his belt. And my wife made a comment about that. And Paul, speak to us a little bit because of your background. You, like I said, you walked into this particularly in the church context, and now you do consult with churches on a regular basis. I want to get to that in a moment, but before that, what should be the average person's perspective when they go out into the world relative to their own personal safety?
Well, I think John Mark hit on it when he goes to the football stadium, right? Is there are people who are looking for victims, right? But I mean, don't go crazy, right? Don't build yourself a house in a cave and never go outside for fear of a lightning strike.
Don't be panicked, and don't run for a deserted island.
That is not salt and light, right? But what is reasonable prudence when you're going out in public? And what I would say is just have a plan. Have a plan so that something happens, you know how that you are going to get you and yours out, right? My brother-in-law and sister will be out to dinner, and so my sister will go, "Hey, some guy comes in there and robs the place. Are you going to get him?" I said, "Nope. I'm going to show you how to run through the back of the kitchen."
I'll lead the way.
Right? It's like, just be smart and have a plan, and where do you go? And that can be as simple as where are the doors, and it can be as complicated as, you both were at an event at the courthouse one day, and you saw my ops plan, and this is how you do something that's very complicated, and how we're going to get a certain number of people into a safe spot if things go bad for us. But it's just be smart. Understand that until the second coming, evil exists, and there's no such thing as crime prevention, right? It's just victim avoidance. You know, I would love to get a conversation with the Allen, Princeton, Plano, Frisco, and the McKinney police chief at the same time, because they all have opposing objectives. They all want it easier for crime to happen in everyone else's city than their own.
The garage door principle.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
It's the garage door. I mean, they all know that they can't end crime, but if they can just make it convenient for it to happen in Plano versus McKinney, that's a win.
Right.
Right. But, you know, that doesn't sound as good as protect and serve on the side of the police cars. Making crime more convenient in Plano since 1982.
Yeah, I don't think
Right.
that's
That's
probably
a
not
tough
gonna
marketing
sell,
not a
sell,
winning
right?
slogan.
So, but Paul, we've talked about this a number of times over the years, and people don't, when they think about their own safety in any environment, they don't think about what it means to depart. But the Bible says, "Flee the devil, and he will flee from you," or flee from him. That's part of our strategy, is to get away, to depart things. And we've talked about wise people de-escalate rather than try to accelerate a conflict situation. Talk a little bit about that, just as a personal principle that our audience can grab hold of. Look, it's sometimes the smartest thing to do most of the time is to just get out of the situation, get you and yours out, and to do everything you can to calm a situation down, to de-escalate a situation. And sometimes the thing that's most called for you to do that is just to leave yourself. So talk a little bit about that principle.
Right. And so I would suggest that the only win in a conflict is the one you don't have. Right. That's the only win. Right. And so your primary mission, whenever you find yourself in potential conflict, whether, you know, you get behind the person at the express line at the grocery store that's got the 15 items and the checkbook and the coupons, and you're just going, are you a math major that can't read or an English major that can't add? I just don't get it. Or you know, there's a traffic conflict and people have varying views as to who's at fault, and there's conflict. I mean, there's a million ways to get into conflict, but the two objectives that you have are suck the energy out of the room and slow things down. Right? It's not about being right. It's not about being wrong. I mean, I had a fender bender on the way to church one morning, and the guy just was going off the rails about, you know, how he thought it was my fault. And I'm like going, there's just absolutely no profit to us even having this conversation. The insurance executives, they're going to sort all this out. We don't even have to talk about it. You know, I'm going to go to church, and I would encourage you to go to church too. And, you know, this little fender bender thing, there's going to be some experts that are going to come in and solve all these questions for us. And we just don't really need to go there. Right. But it's all about, you know, bringing the volume down, bringing the energy out of the interaction and engagement, and slowing things down. Because, man, the fast and quick response is rarely the best one, because that's typically the most emotionally driven. And it's like, hey, we call it domino thinking. And this is where we spend so much time training our security teams, is like going, hey, I want you to tell me that you thought about where the last domino would fall before you push that first domino over. Right? Where is this likely to end and how? And is that a 90% good, 10% bad, or is that a 90% bad, 10% good? But we need to teach you to use your brain in a way that you've maybe never actually been forced to do it. But it's, you know, because we're so conditioned to winning, right? It's just the American culture. It's all about winning. The McKinney Allen culture is all about winning. It's about achievement. And, you know, but is it about people? Right? And people that are coming at you you know, we've heard the phrase, it's not the dogs barking.
Right.
Right. They're coming at you hard and heavy, and it's like, hey, can I be emotionally detached enough, long enough to just say, let me suck the energy out of this engagement and slow things down and see if we can't point this in a people honoring, if not God honoring direction. Does that make sense?
Right, because so many things, especially if you encounter these at church, you know, you and I have lived through experiences where spouses that were in conflict with each other, decide that the church is going to be the ground in which they're going to carry out their conflict, particularly if their children are involved. But almost all of these, whether it's sand volleyball court, on a Tuesday night or something, there's almost always a lot of emotion that is built up in these situations that ultimately bring about the potential, if not the reality, of actual physical violence, which is obviously one of the fundamental things that we're trying to avoid. And if we can learn those skills, especially have people available who have the skill of de-escalating that emotion and getting people to kind of at least go to their neutral corners, if not leave the property altogether and follow up in a more effective way, but getting that emotion under control, because that's just oftentimes where things get out of hand. That's where the trigger comes. And if it's two people that are having marital trouble or relational trouble in some context, if there's a child involved, that accelerates the emotion of it. And those are things that people have to be, they have to be helped through those kinds of situations. And we're not even talking about what you mentioned earlier, which is hurting people hurt people. We also have big issues of mental illness. We've had the occasion at the church that I pastored in McKinney where we had a person that was mentally ill, but was yelling in very vulgar terms at the top of his lungs in the middle of the lobby one Sunday. And that's not something you can easily avoid when you're trying to gather a group of people for worship. And what do you do about that in recognizing that this person has some mental illness that they're really working with? Paul, this has kind of grown from, hey, let's go see if we can work to make a few things better, to now you actually have kind of a side gig besides your full-time job, consulting with churches. Tell us a little bit about how, when you get called by a church, hey, Paul, come talk to us about this. We're not doing anything, but we're worried or we're concerned. You can pull me into this about, kind of like John Mark said a moment ago, some of this made me go, wait a minute, do we have to do all that? Do we have to go that far? You want that kind of budget for this? Talk a little bit about when you go and sit down with a church for the first time, what are you experiencing? What are you encountering among those kinds of conversations when you start trying to consult with a congregation?
A is shock and surprise, right? I never anticipated being here. This was not part of the plan. It was, hey, we need something for our church, and we put it together, and then people would hear about it and say, hey, what are you guys doing? How you doing that? Hey, can you come talk to us about us doing that? And then that church talked to Cottonwood, and Cottonwood talked to Christ Fellowship, and Cross Point talked to Preston Ridge, and it just grows and grows and grows. But it's about quality and approaching it from a ministry first, right? We don't take new church people and train them into being ministers. We take ministers and teach them security skills, right? We're ministers, we're greeters, we're ushers, we're churchmen, right? And women.
Yeah, great term that doesn't get used enough.
Yeah,
churchmen.
For a few decades now, but churchmen first. We're ministers first, and we approach issues from a ministry perspective first. Right? Are we concerned about the safety? Well, yeah, because that's our family in that church, right? Those are our kids. That's our spouse that's in there. And so if there was a security incident that occurred, there's no question that we would respond, but do we have the tools and the talent and the training and the tactics to respond effectively and efficiently? But it's just, hey, where are you at? Where you're going? And the first question is, where's your church leadership on this? And where are you with submission to that? Right? Because, when we decided to launch our program, it was unanimous in the elder board and the staff. They were all to a person, yes, we think this is the way to go. And we started on this journey together. But, for the folks that are out there listening to this, that they want to, but they're getting resistance from their pastors or their church leadership, let's talk about submission, right? Let's talk about God has that person in that position for a reason, and you need to submit to that leadership. That doesn't mean you need to give up on it. That doesn't mean you need to get frustrated when they need to think on it and pray on it and read the stats on it or just mull it over some. That means, be steadfast, have godly perseverance, but submit to the leadership of your church. So it's always, where's the leadership of the church want to go? And how many members of the church leadership are going to actually participate in the ministry? And if that's, y'all can do whatever you want to do, but I'm out, right? Because it is absolutely imperative for any ministry, safety and security being no exception, that there be no variance between them and the church leadership, that they are always in lockstep together and going in the same direction. Because when there starts to generate some separation there, bad things happen. Personalities get involved and egos get involved, and words like right and wrong get thrown around pretty recklessly in church circles.
As you talk in that, Paul, and just for someone, and I want you to continue in that vein and that thought, if someone's out there fixing to approach a pastor or a minister, you mentioned personalities get involved, and that is a reality. And maybe if this is a pastor that's out there, I will tell you, my church has not become less friendly because we have a security team. If anything, we continue to preach eye contact and handshakes. Now, we'll also say this, that part of the help in the process was, so for the person you're speaking to go to the pastor, the two guys that walked into my office were two servants in my church with gentle spirits. You don't necessarily think of FBI and Secret Service as being those kind of guys, but that's who they were, right? They were not caustic individuals that made everybody they shook hands with angry. They were not looking to create a space that was unfriendly.
And not looking for a fight.
And they were not looking for a fight. They don't want to fight. They want to prevent the fight, just as you said. So I would just say, as you're talking through and you're connecting with, and you should be connecting with, lay people who may need to approach their pastor or church leadership, make sure that when you approach them, that first of all, be likable. How about that? And because there are people that I don't want them serving in other ministries in my church. So why should all of a sudden let them be the person no one likes in the security ministry of our church? What I like about the people throughout the week that Paul sends over, I walked up with those guys, shake their hand. They got smiles on their face. They're my paid security guys, and they're not standing in a corner just eyeballing everybody. They're
hiding behind dark sunglasses.
Exactly.
Right.
That's not what you want. So I want the pastor out there to know, or the layperson out there to know, that my church has a pretty well-developed security apparatus now, but it hasn't made us less friendly.
Good point.
I will tell you, as a pastor, I don't want a less friendly church, and I would not want a security ministry that made my church less friendly. And so that's part of the way you approach it. And so I'm going to let you continue to go, but that is a resistance of pastors out there, especially if the wrong person comes to them. And so to the pastor, there have been several people join our security team that we ran off of our security team because they wanted to be a power trip. And this is not about a power trip. This is about the safety and love of our people.
Yeah, very. I've watched Paul do this in our church in other contexts, picking very careful about who he picks and recruits into this kind of ministry. I want to turn the conversation. We have just a few more minutes, but Paul, I wanted to kind of turn the conversation. Obviously, guns and gun control is a big, big issue in our world. We've had a number of conversations over the years about guns at church, guns being visible, not visible at church, uniform security versus not uniform security. I imagine everybody listening to this would be, hey, I'm all about church being safe. I'm all about having medical professionals ready to go if somebody has a medical crisis at church. That's all great. I think we ought to have a security system that we set at night. It'd be good to have cameras in certain places of the church, just particularly to keep people safe and have that kind of going thing. But guns is another thing. We're all for guards. We're all for people, being wise and for the church taking wise. But having guns at church for some people is a challenging topic. How have you worked with that? How do you approach that topic? You and I have had some great times going to the gun range together, and so where we live, this is here in Texas. Where you are in the world, where you are in the country, this conversation goes a lot of different directions as it relates to firearms. But how do you think about that? How do you train people when it comes to helping oversee a congregation relative to weapons, especially guns?
Well, one, I am absolutely opposed to visible firearms in non-uniform security officer capacity, right? Because we're coming to the house of the Lord to experience the Spirit of God, right? And anything that's a distraction to that is a distraction to that, right? It's counter to what we're trying to accomplish on a Sunday morning worship service. And so I don't want to see people with guns, right? Now, if we do, I don't run up and smack them in the head. It's like going, hey, can you do me a favor and either conceal that or put it back in your car? I said, we have a policy about no visible firearms here in the church. Now, from a broader perspective, I don't have a 10-day period go by without somebody in the church going, hey, I have my license to carry. Is it okay? Is it okay if I carry it and when I come to church? And I of course, I've evolved this, but now it's like, sure, do whatever you think is best for you and your family. Just understand these dynamics. That in the event of an event, we've got a security team. We got a security team that is going to take care of the threat before the fifth thought. And so the first thought is, what was that? Second thought is danger. Third thought, protect my family. Fourth thought, protect myself. Fifth thought is, should I get involved in this? And so all of the security professionals are trained to eliminate the threat before the fifth thought. If you step up and have a gun in your hand, it might not go well for you. Just know that regardless of your personal inclinations, there's a trained professional security team that's going to be tasked with solving the problem. Don't become a part of that, right? And then put it back in their lap. It's okay. I'm not going to jump up. I'm going to call it a day at protecting my family,
right?
And other people are going to address the threat,
right? Good word. And there are occasions we've typically gone at our church along the lines of scale. When you get to a certain scale, or particularly if you're having an outdoor event, might be wise to have uniform. What's the benefit of uniformed security? So
we have a matrix system that kind of goes based on how many people do we have on campus and what's the mix, right? Is it all known people? Or is it an outreach event where there's a lot of unknown people? Did we rent out the church for a concert that we have no idea who's coming? And so the more people we have that are unknown, the more we go for a uniformed deterrent presence. And then if it's a church picnic where we're all at Hawaiian Falls, then we'll have non-uniform people there for that kind of thing. Now they still have all the hardware. It's just not going to be visible. Right. But there's times that we move for more visible deterrence based on the number of people on campus and the mix being more heavily weighted towards people that we don't know that aren't necessarily part of the congregation versus an internal event.
So last question to wrap up for both of you. So, John Mark, how important is this for the average local church pastor or church leader that's listening to this, the person you kind of spoke to a little while ago, the guy that's maybe listening to this on his way to work and think, I need to go have that conversation with my pastor. From your perspective, how important is this in the environment of a local congregation?
Well, it's not as important as salvation or doing church, but I will tell you, in today's environment, I think if a church does not have a security team that is developing or developed, I think they're missing the mark. That I would rate this as a high value ministry, and we still call it a ministry in our church, a high value ministry. And why is it such a high value? because it is what is going to help protect our children and our students and our seniors and our elderly, those who are most vulnerable. Because here's what we do know, that if a significant event happens in a church or a church facility and there's not an adequate response, that place will probably never be trusted again. So I would say it's of absolute necessity that wherever the person is that is listening to this, if you are the pastor, you better be open to it. If you are a lay person who has a heart for this ministry, go help develop the ministry. So I think it's important.
Well, and you get some indication of that. We're unfortunately, just when we see the examples of mass shootings, particularly, this grocery store that was serving this community in Buffalo is likely never to open again.
Yeah.
There's a strong call in Uvalde that we're just going to tear this school down. And you apply that to a church, you could see how a church could possibly be just put out of business. Even if the incident is handled well, it could still happen that way. Paul, where would you encourage a church and church leaders, people that attend church, to talk to their pastor about this? Where's a good place to start, and what's a framework of expectation, particularly in these last few minutes? Talk a little bit about the importance of really quality training when people get involved in this. Most of the time, they're going to be volunteers, and there'll be hopefully a leader. There needs to be a primary owner that says, this is going to be my ministry to lead. But frame out a little bit of expectation and practicality in terms of where can a Christian, where can a church start with this, and then what are some expectations, particularly around people and training and even budget?
So the first step is always with church leadership, right, where you are. And John Mark alluded to this. If you're the guy who has this on your heart, this could be God calling you to this. Don't ignore this. Go talk to your church leadership about it and see where they're at. There are a ton of resources that are available now that were not available when we were starting this thing out 15 years ago, right? We've got the National Association called the Faith-Based Security Network is out there now. And
there's such a thing.
Oh, and they are a tremendous resource, and they have these round tables on Saturday morning where they just pick a topic like door locks. What kind of doors to have, what kind of doors to try and avoid, and how do you secure certain types of doors and to access control systems, to fire alarm systems, to practices and policies. Century One Consulting is led by a guy named Paul Lake, and he's here in the Metroplex, and he's a giant in this space about talking churches through how to get started. He's got, fill in the blank process and procedure manuals and emergency response plans, which, big advocate, every church should have one in case tornadoes, bomb threats, fire. Just normal stuff. Do you know what to do? And do the people that are in charge of doing it know how to do it, right? Basic stuff. Start with that. To pastors and church leaders, I'd say, hey, if you're going to commission some of your lay people to do this, give them the support and the budget they need to actually get it accomplished. Right? I always want to see somebody in lay leadership, at least, as the executive sponsor of the security ministry. And then there's a team leader. And these people are seasoned people in your church that have a long tenure of a servant's heart, that what their tenor and demeanor is, that they're a good fit for this, right? That they have that emotional capital with you. When they come and sit down with you and say, hey, I've got a concern, you listen because you know their heart. You know what their investment is in the church as far as servant and getting things done and spreading the gospel. And so, pastors, if this is the direction you go, make sure you not only give them the leadership capital, but give them a budget that they can actually get it done with, and start with an eyes and ears group that are watching for things, and then get them some communication so they can communicate one with another, and then get them some force multipliers like a video surveillance system so they can, one person can see lots of areas of the church and you don't need as many people. And, we have 10 training cycles at our core curriculum. It's emergency response plans. It's dealing with difficult parents. Odd that one comes. You ever had one of those?
Just a few.
Every now and then.
Handling, how to move a disruptive person out of your congregation when they don't want to move, right? Advanced first aid, combat medicine, spotting abused children, spotting child abusers and patterns and target softening that they do. You know, our teams have 3 shooting qualifications a year, and then once a year we red team them, right? We bring in, it's hysterical and humiliating all at the same time. We bring in a team of actors that they come in with scripts and they just pound your security team on scenario after scenario after scenario that they hit cold, and then they do what they do. And then you critique what they did well and what didn't go so well.
Right.
But it's very experiential learning. And so this is how your volunteer teams get experience, right? And then you see people, right? You know, how do people interact? You see the guys. Are they they standing in the corner with crossed arms? Or are they out there shaking hands and greeting people and saying hello, and they know your staff members' names, and they know your lay leaders' names, and they interact with folks, and they know what looks right and they know what doesn't look right. They're an extension of your hospitality staff, right? If done correctly.
Right.
You know, sure, we can fix boo-boos and we can handle major emergencies and we can work cameras, and those are the bulk of the calls, right? Yeah, can they take care of business? Yes, they know how to do that too. But that's not what people see. That's not what they do most of the time, but they have that capability. I mean, one of the things that's happened at both of your churches is that you were able to get the right people in place so that your congregations adopted a culture of security. And so now when they see it, you know, when they see a uniformed, you know, security officer out there opening the doors for the ladies', you know, dinner gala, they look forward to them being there. They expect them to be there. They appreciate seeing them, and they know their name, and they say hi, and they have a good time, and it's a part of the tapestry of the infrastructure of what we call church.
Right. And works well, and is an evolving reality for sure. Well, guys, thank you for your time today, and thank you for what you do. Thank you for who you are and for how this is going to help a number of churches think through this issue in a big way. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Denison Forum podcast. If it's been helpful to you, please rate and review us and pass this on to someone that can be used, that will find it useful as well. Thanks for being a part today.